We up? I thought that we would talk today about envy and jealousy. Why don't we start off with a working definition of envy and jealousy? Who wants to go first? I guess you guys don't know much about the term, never experienced it, can't come up with a definition. What do you got for me, Nick?
Envy is when you want something that someone else has.
Okay, good, excellent. Coyote?
I was going to say that the desire to be in someone else's shoes.
Desire to be in somebody else's shoes, okay, good. Somebody else had their hand up? Yes? The inability to be happy for someone else's success or good fortune? Excellent, yeah. More? Yeah?
Jealousy would be wanting...
Why are you defining jealousy when I asked for a definition of envy? Did I? I said I want to do it. Okay. All right, so that's my bad. I'm outvoted here. Let's start with envy. Okay. Envy is generally speaking defined as a feeling of resentment, which is anger at unfair treatment. I guess we got to define resentment as well. It's a problem sometimes with definitions is when you get into definitions of emotions, a lot of times the emotions themselves require further definitions. So resentment is anger at unfair treatment. And so envy would be a bitter anger and longing for what someone else has. And so envy generally relates to two people, you and the person that is envied. And you want what they have, or as Coyote poetically said, you want to be in their shoes. And so that's envy. Now, a consequence of envy is that you are unable to be happy for the other person's success or value. And so you can't tolerate somebody else's good quality because you end up comparing yourself to them, or more literally, you end up contrasting yourself to them. Comparing is when you find equivalence between you and somebody else, and contrasting is when you find difference. And so when you measure yourself up to somebody else and compare yourself to them, you come up short and you see a contrast between their ability or quality or status and yours. And so, the thing you envy them for is just something that you find valuable. Something that you find valuable. It could be their looks, it could be their intelligence, it could be their financial situation, it could be their fame and popularity, it could be their degree of renunciation, their peacefulness, their simplicity, their honesty, their good upbringing, their good family, their good relationships, their mental health. But you see they've got something and you want that thing, and then that results in you feeling discontent, longing, uncomfortable, angry, and bitter. Feel like we have a good definition of envy? Working definition of envy? Okay, envy in Latin is invidia, comes from the Sanskrit root vid. It's where you get the word Veda from. It's also where you get the word idea from in German and in English. And it's also where you get the word video from. To know something. To see something. And so you see into them. So in vidya, you see into them. You see something in them you want. You give them the evil eye. You heard that before? The evil eye? So that's envy. In India, it's kind of common. When a child is born, they'll put a black dot on the child's face somewhere. So that if some envious person looks at the child, they'll see a flaw and it won't arouse their envy because it's understood that envy will act as a curse. And so they'll purposefully put a little cudgel, a little like, Calarium, yeah, thank you, on the child, a little, old school mascara. And they'll put a little bit there to then, give the child a spot. Of course, we call those beauty spots. You have them in just the right configuration and quantity. They enhance the beauty. If you can imagine somebody with spots all over their face, then it might become a little problematic. Although, you've got the kind of ginger thing, and that ends up working for people. But, you can imagine somebody with warts all over their face, and at some level of density, it becomes less attractive. So invidia, seeing into somebody. In Purgatory, Purgatorio by Dante in his famous, Divina Commedia? Commedia Divina, the Divine Comedy, and it's three poems for, you guys know this? For hell and inferno and purgatorio and paradiso. So it's hell and purgatory and paradise. It's a famous poem written by an Italian poet several centuries ago that, I want to say 1700s. 16? 15?
No, early 1400s.
Oh, okay. Super Dark Ages stuff.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the Renaissance.
Thank you. All right. So, good thing I got... Were you a history major at some point?
Yeah.
You were. All right.
Medievalist, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. The imagery in purgatory is kind of a standard Christian concept that when you die, if you are part of the elected, that are going to heaven, but you have to go to a place to expiate your sins. It's sort of a semi-hell type situation, and you suffer, but not forever, and then you get purified of your sins, and as a result of getting purified of your sins, you're able to go to heaven at the time of the final judgment. And so in purgatory, you get these hells, but they're not permanent hells. They're temporary hells. So the hell or the purgatory for the envious is that their eyes are sewn shut with wire, like you sew a falcon's eyes shut with wire, with leaden wire, so that they can't look at people with the evil eye and be envious of them. So they're denied the ability to look at people, and like falcons and falconry, their eyes are sewn shut. I don't think they actually sew their eyes shut, falcons. They just put a hood on them. But this is a more fierce form of that. Anyway, the evil eye, seeing into someone. Sometimes people, poetically, they say that, their eyes are sewn shut so they cannot see the beauty and the good, or their eyes are so shut by their own envy and they can't see the beauty and the good in all things. I'll give some kind of lesson from this. Shakespeare in Antony and Cleopatra compares envy to the color green. And so there's this green with envy. That's from Shakespeare. It's another color green. And envy have been long associated with one another. And I don't think Shakespeare made it up. It must have been something that was extant at his time, and so he used it. All right, we got a good knowledge of envy. Let's talk jealousy. What's jealousy? I mean, obviously Shri has an answer. Go ahead.
Unlike envy, it's not necessarily relational to another person. It's relational to an object an object. So you're jealous of something that someone has, as opposed to another person themselves, and it doesn't necessarily require.
Okay, stop. That is not the way the term is defined in the literature. Which I'm surprised because when I say the literature, I mean in psychology and in affective literature, the psychology of emotions and their consequent behaviors. So jealousy, I'm just going to make it fast because I showed up late. Jealousy is about three. Envy is dyadic. It's about a dyad. It's about two people. You and the person you envy. What they have, what they represent. When you're young and you're a child, it's usually material envy. You envy people because they have cooler clothes or cooler games or this or that, cooler house. As you get older, you start to envy people for their personal qualities, their relationships. Envy and jealousy are synonymous. That's why jealousy is called the green-eyed monster in Shakespeare's Othello, and it's also a green-eyed monster in The Merchant of Venice. And so jealousy is also synonymous with envy. In fact, jealousy and envy are synonymous in popular literature. People will say, I'm jealous of my colleague who got a raise. Or they'll say, I'm envious of my colleague who got a raise. And both those statements can be synonymous. Therefore, when you're talking about envy, you can use the word jealousy as a synonym for envy, and it works just fine today in 2023 in the English language. Envy and jealousy have been difficult for people to define and distinguish between traditionally over the centuries as people have been trying to do it. And so what I'm telling you is just reflective of status quo, the standard definitions that are out there now, but they're multivalent enough that each psychologist or theorist will take the trouble to define these terms separately. And so what I'm trying to give you guys is a general collective understanding. And most dictionaries get it wrong. It's a detailed enough term that most dictionaries get it wrong. You actually have to go into affective literature that studies the basis of emotions to find out these fine distinctions. Whereas envy is dyadic, jealousy has an extra dyadic component. It's triadic. There's a third party. And you're jealous when you perceive there is a threat to a relationship that is valuable to you. Children display jealousy at the age of as early as 6 months old. An infant, if the mother begins to play with a doll in the shape of a child, the child will begin to show signs of distress as early as 6 months old. When there's a relationship that is significant to you, that's a dyadic relationship, a relationship between two people, and that relationship is important to me, and that person I'm linked to. Actually, when we link to people, it's no joke. Our brain chemistry links to them And if you have a relationship with somebody and you develop love for them and attachment to them, you get oxytocin, and your serotonin is regulated, which is very important, and you get dopamine hits, really heavy neurotransmitters with their drug-like effect and euphoric effects. SSRIs is the standard drug you give to somebody who has depression, and that's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It stops the serotonin from getting reabsorbed, and so it keeps it circulating in your brain so you can continue to enjoy the euphoric effects, and your body doesn't just immediately steal it away from you so you become depressed again, correct? So this is no joke. Aromatase inhibitors to stop, testosterone from being reabsorbed into your body and not be able to be, what do they call it, free testosterone. The testosterone your body can use. You take aromatase inhibitors to stop that. And so you take these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that stop the serotonin from being reabsorbed by your body so that you aren't able to keep your mood upbeat. This happens from very, very early on. It has incredible survival value. You attach yourself to a parental figure, and you feel safe with them, and they provide for you and take care of you. And the attachment that forms between the two of you is indicative of your increased survivability because you've been able to form that attachment. If that attachment is removed and you're young, you're much more likely to die of malnutrition, of violence. Because unlike almost all other mammals, we require this ridiculous amount of care for years as infants. One time, one of our cows at our farm was pregnant, and we didn't even notice. A cow weighs like 1,100 pounds. So they put on an extra 100 pounds. It doesn't even register. What are we talking about? A very slight, like a 10% increase in their body weight. It's just not that big of a deal. You got to really look closely to notice. And so one day we just woke up. We heard her moo a couple times at night, which happens, and then the next day we woke up and there was a calf out there. Like, whoa. That's the whole thing. There's a calf out there because her male offspring had impregnated the mother because they're animals and there's no incest rule or taboo about incest. Animals go into heat and it happens. We didn't notice it because before we separated them, somehow they got it past us. She got pregnant and gave birth, and it takes a few generations for the incest to be problematic amongst animals, and so it wasn't a big deal. But we just woke up and she had a baby, and the baby was walking around doing his thing, jumping. And you compare that to a human child, they can't even roll over for 4 months. They can't even roll over. What to speak of running around and doing their thing. So we require this incredible amount of care, and we have a psychology that allows for that. We get super attached to our parents, generally. Unless your parents aren't around and they give you to a nanny, and then you get super attached to your nanny because you need someone who's there for you, who you're there for, and they become everything to you because you're dependent on them. It's important, but because we have these huge, massive brains and we're capable of all this thought, it's not just instinctual. There's a whole psychological component, and we think about it. And we develop very, very refined thoughts about our affection and our love and our need for people, and it all gets tied into our brain chemistry. So then jealousy is when there's an extra dyadic competitor in that relationship between two people. And now there's somebody who's competing with you for the affection that you've grown accustomed to. And so jealousy is not about objects, unless you're speaking about colloquially. And a really easy way to distinguish between this is, you can use jealousy as a synonym for envy, but you can't use envy as a synonym for jealousy. For example, I'm envious of my colleague who got the raise. Does that work? I'm jealous of my colleague who got the raise. Does that work? Of course it works. Somebody said to you, I'm jealous of my colleague who got a raise, you would 100% know exactly what they were talking about. Yes or no? Okay. Don't try and get too smart. Just answer the question naively. Envy and jealousy are then used synonymously. You follow? A jealous boyfriend. An envious boyfriend. Is that the same thing? Does that communicate the same thing to you in English? It doesn't. An envious boyfriend means he's envious of something maybe that his girlfriend has or that somebody else has. It's not necessarily linked to their relationship. It could be about something. That's, in fact, what you think it's about. A jealous boyfriend, however, is very clear that they're jealous of a relationship. You can even take out boyfriend. Boyfriend might skew in our favor. An envious man versus a jealous man. A jealous man is jealous about some relationship. An envious man is envious about something. And so although the words are used synonymously, there is a fine distinction that's even there for all of us as lay people. That fine distinction still exists. All envy could be described as jealousy in English in 2023 without any loss in communication. However, if you substitute envy for jealousy, you will skew the meaning. Jealousy comes from zelos, where you get the word zeal from. It means to bubble up, like yeast bubbles up. It's a bubbling up of emotion. It used to be a positive thing, and then eventually, sometime around the Middle Ages, it became a bad thing. And now the term jealousy is a bad thing. And it's a green-eyed monster, according to Shakespeare. So now you guys all know the distinction between envy and jealousy. And we can now get to class. These emotions are so common that they represent things you've experienced since before you can remember. They are so a part of your existence that they are secondary to, but not much different than things like happiness and sadness. They're basic, fundamental emotions that everybody experiences. But yet, almost nobody talks about them. And almost nobody admits to them. Schopenhauer, the famous German philosopher, he said envy is this emotion that everyone experiences, but no one will admit to. Jiva Goswami, our theologian, describes envy as the inability to tolerate the eminence of another, the good quality of another. Schopenhauer defines it the same way. The inability to stand in another's greatness, to see another's greatness. He distinguishes it from Schadenfreude. You guys know what Schadenfreude is? Schadenfreude is happiness at the suffering of another. It's a German term. When you become happy at somebody else's suffering, that is Schadenfreude. Joy felt at the suffering of others. It means that the Germans were really dark people. It also just means they were honest. Mitfreude is happiness at the joy of another. You see another's joy and you become happy also. That could be contrasted to Schadenfreude, happiness at sorrow. And so those terms existed because they're German terms, so Schopenhauer used them. And he explained that envy was okay, but Schadenfreude was devilry. If it got to that level where you were actively wishing ill on somebody. In Dutch, they make a distinction between envy that motivates you to try and be a better person yourself and envy that makes you want to tear the other person down. They have two different words. Some theorists say envy is experienced the same, but your reaction to the envy is what's different. Other people say no, the emotion itself is different. It's a subject of debate amongst theorists today. Is it that you experience envy and you just, because of your nature and your training and society, you learn to then rise up and try harder? Or you drag the other person down, but the experience of envy is the same? Or is it rather that you experience a different emotion, which is a positive emotion that motivates you to want to do better, versus a negative emotion which makes you want to tear the other person down? Is it a response to a singular feeling, or is it two distinct feelings? It's an interesting subject, isn't it? I think this stuff is worth thinking about. I think this stuff is worth thinking about. And I think it's worth thinking about because everybody experiences envy and jealousy. And so learning about the emotions allows you to deal with them in a productive way, in a healthy way. Jealousy is generally like way more complex. Envy is fairly simplistic. Somebody has something and you want it, or you want to take it away from them, or you don't want them to have it because it makes you feel small. It's linked to shame. At least amongst many theorists, it's linked to shame, and I agree. Shame is a basic feeling of inadequacy. Shame is sometimes contrasted to guilt. We'll save that for another day. We'll just define shame here real simply as a basic feeling of inadequacy in relationship to other people. And so shame would be low self-esteem. It would make you feel, it leads to anger, it leads to withdrawal from social dealings. It's a basic feeling of inadequacy, and inadequacy is always experienced in relationship to other people because that's just how our brains work. We always compare and contrast ourselves to our surroundings. If you want to get free from that, you got to work on it. But as almost a basic survival mechanism of comparing and contrasting, it's incredibly important. In fact, jealousy has a survival component to it. You're jealous because you want to keep the other person in your life in a romantic relationship because that's going to enable you to create progeny and offspring and carry on your genes and pass on your genes. Or in a non-romantic relationship where you can also be jealous, that relationship affords you benefits and increased survivability. And if it's taken away from you by another person, then your chances of dying or being bereft increase. These emotions are so basic, they're almost instinctual. And so the idea that you're just never going to compare yourself to anybody else, I don't know that we can actually change our worldview so much, because I think there's incredible survival value in the basic ability to look at other people and then relate them to yourself. I think empathy depends on that to a large extent. You just see somebody else and compare them to yourself in a positive way. And so the idea that you never build on your own experience and extend it to another and look at their experience and relate it to your own, I mean, you'd be reinventing the wheel your entire life. And so maybe it's popular and like on Instagram to try and posit that you can do this, but I think that really you just have to train yourself as a secondary emotion or within your cognitive processes that you take comparison and it doesn't devolve to envy. And it especially doesn't devolve into schadenfreude. And that you're able to see things and make comparisons without reaching a judgment or a conclusion automatically and descending into shame. I do think shame and envy and jealousy can be overcome. I don't think comparison as a basic trait of human beings in terms of how they look at the world and relate to it instinctually, I don't think that can be overcome, nor should it be. I do, however, think these emotions I'm describing can be overcome. And it's a process, and that's what I want to talk about today. Um, Jealousy is generally a much more complex. There's suspicious jealousy and reactionary jealousy, where there's no evidence to support your jealousy, but you're jealous anyway. A man becoming jealous of his wife for having an affair, and there's just absolutely no evidence whatsoever to suggest that there's anything going on with anybody. And even the guy probably in his heart somewhere knows that, but he just can't help himself. Of course, I'm sorry for being... what's the term for someone who's a... What's the term for a reverse? And if you know the term, don't say it. It's meant for... What's the other term besides misogynist for someone who hates men? Yeah, you guys do know the term. Who said that?
People I did.
You did. Did you learn it from me?
No, from men's rights activists on
Okay, I did. I just was wondering one day. Misogyny, gynecologist, misandrist, androgenic. And so andros means man. Misandrist, hatred of men. Somehow the hatred of men is not looked down upon as much as hatred of women is. Which I think is unfair. But I think, given that men have been abusing women, for the most part, for far beyond all recorded history, and that male mammals have been abusing female mammals since they existed, I think if we just miss the term misandrist and we focus on misogynist, I don't think it's a terrible, awful crime. Did you guys follow that? Like one of my favorite fighters, one of the scariest fighters that was ever in the UFC, who's now on trial for chasing a guy down with a gun, shooting at him because the guy abused his niece, and so he chased him down in a car with a gun and shot at him. Cain Velasquez. Just an athlete. He was a heavyweight fighter who generally they lumber around, they're slow, but he had an unlimited gas tank and was able to be very, very active and move very, very quickly, which you never see. He also had phenomenal striking and phenomenal wrestling. He went downhill, had a really short-lived career, but some of his fights were some of the most iconic, lopsided fights in the history of combat sports, where he just took top-tier guys and just ripped them limb from limb and had them running, literally running from him, scared. He has a tattoo on his, he's Mexican. He has a big tattoo on his chest that says Brown Pride. Brown Pride. No problem. Right? Viva la raza. No problem. It's like it's good. No sweat. Or if it was a black athlete and he had a tattoo that said Black Power. Like a light-skinned black guy. So you could see it. Black Power. Huge tattoo. Said Black Power. People would be like, good for you. Cool. No sweat. If you're the white dude with the letters SWP on his chest, which stands for, none of you know that? You know what it means. What's SWP mean? There you go. Spoken like a convict. A tattoo that says SWP or white power or even white pride, they would never get a contract in a legitimate organization to fight. Why? Because white people took advantage of black and brown people for a long time. And so if in the post-colonial, post-slavery era, black and brown people reclaim their pride in their ethnicity and they want to wear that as a badge of honor and inked on them, okay, cool, it's okay. And it's just a sideline note that although people might not go as big on misandry as they do on misogyny, that's the way it works when one group of people has been abusing the other for too long a period of time. The pendulum has to swing. Does that make sense? So anyway, you got this suspicious jealousy, and there's no reason for it. Then you got reactionary jealousy, where there is actually a reason for it. Then you get your strategies for dealing with your jealousy, which either can be communicative or general. Either you directly confront the person that you are trying to hold on to, and you can do that in low-risk ways, like you just stop talking to them, or in high-risk ways, like you beat them up. You can do it in indirect ways, going and doing something else and withdrawing. Or you can do it in more direct ways, have a conversation with them about it. And you can do it to try and repair the relationship by getting them back. You can do it to discover what's actually going on, like surveillance. It can be positive or negative. So there's theorists get in this whole thing of, low communicative responses to jealousy, low risk and indirect, low directness, low risk versus high directness and high risk. And then they also get into general responses, which can be discovery responses or repairing responses, and whether those responses are positive or negative. And so it becomes a whole subject of studying how people respond to jealousy, respond to envy by trying to improve themselves or trying to drag the other person down, or if it gets even worse, it's like schadenfreude, where you want to see them suffer. Sanskrit has a bunch of words for this stuff too. Amarsha, Asuya, Matsarya. These are words for the inability to tolerate the good fortune of another person, a tendency to grumble, like almost like a bubbling up, like jealousy, its original meaning, a bubbling up of negativity and speaking ill of the person, hatred of the person, dvisha. So there's a bunch of terms in Sanskrit which we could get into, and it would be interesting to compare those to their Western equivalents, but we're not going to because we're a little short on time and I showed up a little late. I have a different strategy for envy and jealousy that I want to share with you guys today. And so I wanted to define the terms, which we've done now. You guys now know what jealousy and envy are. I wanted to describe the naturalness of them so you wouldn't think that comparing itself was the problem. And I wanted to make a point that at some point that comparison turns into envy or jealousy. I also wanted to look, so bear with me here. Comparing is the genesis of all these emotions. Comparison. People think you can stop that. You can't. Where most people try to focus is on your behavioral response. It's over here. I also think that's too late. I think this is too early. I think this is too late. I think trying to stop comparison is impossible. You're trying to get there too early. And I think it's like if your solution to overeating is just to stop eating altogether, you've got a problem. It's like it's too radical of a solution. It won't work. And I think this, trying to change your behavior, is too late because you've already got this envy and jealousy living inside you. And so that's a problem. Did you guys follow this? Then they have stimulus-based therapy where you try to focus on what things make you envious so you avoid those things. Or you think about your good qualities and that helps you avoid the envy. I also think those are just kind of dumb solutions. Those are the intermediate solutions. So number one, you stop the comparison altogether. I don't think it's possible. And I gave you my evidence for why. And that all that biology was designed to really make that case strong. On the other hand, I gave you a little surveil of some of the late to the party solutions. And I don't like those either. They're too late in the game for me. I want to focus on the actual negative emotion, the experience of a sense of resentment and anger and longing for what somebody else has. And I want to focus on the fear of loss of a relationship. I want to focus on those two aspects of the actual emotions themselves and try to rework those emotions so they're experienced as different emotions. So we're not starting at the beginning. You're allowed to compare. We're not starting at the end. You merely modify your behavior. I want to attack what I think is the root of where human beings can do amazing work with these emotions by not experiencing envy and jealousy. You guys follow this? And in that interim thing, there's this stimuli thing where you just focus on not putting yourself in situations where you're envy stimulated. I think that's a dumb one. And then they also focus on, listing your good qualities so you'll realize you have good things about yourself. I also think that one's a little trite, a little petty, kind of amateurish. So I wanted to give some, and surprisingly, there's so much stuff on the behavior, but there's so little on the actual emotions, and that I feel like there's some value to be found in exploring this stuff. And so what follows, everything that came earlier is just me studying the emotions and reading the literature on it. What I'm going to share with you next is my thoughts. It's not coming from I'm not reciting to you other theorists. This is my own theory. So if it's a good one, then I get credit, and if it's a bad one, then you guys can dismiss it. As I mentioned before, envy comes from shame. Seeing someone else's fortune, their beauty or their strength or their knowledge or their achievements, their success, their wisdom, even their peace, their health, makes you feel insufficient because you don't have those things, and therefore it creates shame, which is a precursor to the experience of envy. Your comparison leads you to a feeling of insufficiency in the presence of the greatness of another. So shame is actually the genesis of feeling of insufficiency that arises upon comparing yourself to another party and seeing that they come out better than you. So the comparison occurred, they came out better, and your response to that is to feel insufficient. And that's shame. And then envy is you want to tear them down and you want to rise up. You get it? It's actually a secondary emotion. It's the result of a shame. This isn't my own theory. This I got from somebody else. What might be even more surprising is that jealousy is also linked to shame. Because when somebody else steals the affection or the attention that you used to enjoy, or you're afraid that someone will come along, even if they haven't come along, and steal that affection that you want to enjoy, that fear stems from shame. Either it does get stolen, and now you're lacking something, namely the affection or the attention that you used to enjoy, or you have a fear it's going to happen. So it either creates shame because in comparison to that other person who's now moved into my position, I come up short and now I feel less than. Therefore, shame is a source of jealousy. Alternatively, jealousy can sometimes arise without a competitor. It's suspicious jealousy. There's no evidence for it. And you're just afraid. That's because you already have a feeling of inferiority and it bubbles up all on its own without any catalyst. Did you guys follow this? But jealousy and envy are secondary emotions that stem from shame, which is itself a feeling of insufficiency or inferiority, either fundamental, where it needs no catalyst, or as a result of a comparison, when you compare yourself to somebody who is exquisite or exemplary or extraordinary in some capacity that you value. If somebody's better than you at something you couldn't care less about, like if somebody's better than you at, playing tiddlywinks, which I don't even know what that game is, I just know the name, but I couldn't care less. Right? Now, if you have a competitive enough personality, you're like, I don't know the game Tiddlywinks, but I'm going to be better at it than you are. Let's get into it. I don't play beer pong, but if I did, And so sometimes there's this competitive nature that we especially see amongst men. That you can get envious about almost anything. You didn't know that they were better at that, and as soon as you know they're better, something you want to get better at that thing than they are. You want to tear them down. So yeah, now we dial it back and we get from envy and jealousy to shame, which comes after comparison, but before envy and jealousy. You follow this? That's where I think we need to do our work, is on shame. And interestingly, when we look at our core texts, they have beautiful verses like Jiver Swarupoi Krishna Nityadas, that the soul has a fundamental form, it's Krishna's eternal servant. We have a lot of time which is spent in our initial literature, even in the Gita, for instance. The beginning of the Gita is an ontology. An ontology is a systematic philosophical study of what exists, basic categories of existence. If you were to look in the modern age at ontology as it exists now, ontology as it exists now is what? Science. What specific branch of science?
Physics. Chemistry.
What specific branch of physics?
Particle physics.
That's right. Quantum physics is a modern day equivalent of ontology because it breaks the world down into quanta. And this quantum versus that quantum versus that quantum. And now you have a basic roadmap of what fundamentally exists. Fundamental particles. And the fundamental forces that control them. That is an ontology. Now, Nick said chemistry, which was my other answer. And what does chemistry break the world down into? A periodic chart of the elements. Generally, by the time you're dealing with chemistry, you're no longer, when you get down below elements, you get down to, it's like, when you get down at least to subatomic particles, and maybe subatomic particles, you're no longer really doing chemistry anymore. Now you're really into the realm of physics. And when you build it up a little bit, you're dealing with, I want to say atoms and molecules, right? And therefore elements. Now you're starting to deal with the realm of chemistry. And so chemistry, of course, is now founded on physics, but it's its own discipline. And a lot of times when we think of an ontology, we think, oh, that's carbon. We don't think, we think that's hydrogen. We think that's water. We don't think, well, that's, H2O. It's 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule. And we don't break it down further than that. We can break it down to water or tin or gold. And so these are 2 different ontologies. One is based on the other, fair enough. But I think they really represent the way modern people think of ontology when they're trying to break the world down into the most fundamental things that exist. The Gita has an ontology. And its ontology is that there's spirit and there's matter, and you are spirit, and you have certain qualities. You're eternal, you're full of knowledge. You're meant to be happy, you're eternally related to God. I think if you deeply embrace that ontology, which is true for every living entity in existence, you now have a platform to no longer feel shame. You can feel another form of shame, which is where you fall short of the expectations of your community, and guilt, which is where you fall short of your own personal expectations. That's other definitions of shame and guilt. But the fundamental lack of completeness, lack of integrity, lack of wholeness, basic insufficiency is cured by a healthy ontological understanding of the nature of self. Therefore, I think one of the subsidiary benefits of deeply immersing yourself in a spiritual tradition, which teaches you something about the nature of self, is that it cures you of shame. And you can see the distinctions and comparisons that exist between you and others for what they are. Much, much less important than the fundamental ways in which you are equivalent to everybody else, namely your soul. Do you follow this? I think on a basic level, a healthy spiritual understanding of ontology cures you forever of shame and gives you an anchor point and gives you a way to never contrast yourself to others, because you look at others and yourself and you see the same fundamental completeness. A spark of splendor. A spark of wonder. Did you guys follow that? That's part one of the cure of envy and jealousy. Then I got part two. Part two is that when you inevitably compare yourself to others, and you see that others are better than you at something, you can choose to appreciate that. You can acknowledge it. Behind envy is admiration. You're just too ashamed and too weak and too uncourageous and too hurt and too broken to experience admiration and appreciation. So it becomes pervertedly manifested as envy. But behind all envy is you compared yourself to somebody and you found they had a quality that you value and they're better at it. And so if you just become practiced at the art of appreciating, wow, you're really strong. You're really fit. You're really smart. You're really good at this. And you learn to go around the world looking for people and what they're good at and what makes them exceptional, and you just appreciate it. You can choose to do that. It's humbling. Because when you appreciate them, you're saying, you're better at that than I am. Like Madan just told me he hit a new PR for a squat. He's doing sets at 245 now. And I was like, that's amazing. I was happy for Madan. Because Madan's my brother. It's like if he gets a better squat, and it's like, he'll bring me up. I'll have to squat harder, squat better. And it's gives me something to shoot for. And I'm happy anyway. If we're going to do a fight, you got to like squat somebody off of me or something like that, then you know, you can squat a larger individual and pull them off of me. Great. If you appreciate people and you love people and you care for people, then their joy becomes your joy, and you experience Mitfreude. You experience joy at somebody else's happiness. And when you see that everybody is a soul and everybody's loved by Krishna, then you feel a connection to everybody. And when you see people who are successful in the world or are good at something in the world, you feel joyful for them, and their joy becomes your joy. And you're complete because you're also a soul. So in a way that really counts, you are enough. There is equality. There is a oneness. There is a sense in which we're all the same. And then when we look at somebody and they have a special quality that makes them exemplary, you can appreciate how, wow, it's like you've manifested that amazing quality. I'm inspired by that. And then you're way more likely to, through osmosis and that appreciation, get better at that thing yourself. Instead of writhing in your own envy and insufficiency. Did you guys follow this? So, a good ontology and knowing that you're a soul as is everybody else cures you of the basic sense of insufficiency. It's the mother cure. It's the panacea. And if you care about spiritual things and who you are fundamentally, you make that your interest, then all the other inequality you see in the world becomes just so small. Like, if we both make $250,000, but you make $250,000 and 1 cent, and I make $249,999.99. Like, who's keeping track? Like, what does it matter? That's what the distinctions in the world between you and people start to feel like when you really have a sense of who you are as a soul. The small comparisons, the small contrasts between you and others are seen for what they are. And you can appreciate the uniqueness of each person. And you can appreciate your own uniqueness too. Interestingly, people experience less envy as they grow older. Because they start to accept who they are. If you can train people in that from a young age, by giving them a good spiritual foundation of equality, you'll start to be able to appreciate what's my dharma in this world, what was I put on this earth to do, what am I naturally good at, what are my natural God-given talents, and it'll be enough for you. That's the cure for envy. A good ontological understanding within our spiritual tradition. For us. For other people, it can be their own tradition, no problem. Coupled with a cultivation in the lost art of appreciating others. And just telling them. And letting the real emotion manifest. The admiration. Instead of trying to bottle that up and have it bubble out as envy. And what goes along with appreciating others and knowing that you're a soul and Krishna loves you, you can start to appreciate the unique things about yourself, and you're not covered by this low self-esteem that beguiles you and makes it impossible for you to see the good in you. And you mature. And what most people have to wait till they're 50 to get around to, you can do when you're 20. You can accept yourself, know God loves you, feel complete as a soul, and then appreciate all the wonderful variety within this world, amazing qualities that other people have that you have too. Do you guys follow that? I got a cure for jealousy too, but it's late. I'm running out of time. I'm going to go quick, just to say something. As far as jealousy goes, you have a relationship with somebody, and that relationship might get affected by other people. Right off the bat, when people fade out of your life, let them go. Let them go. If you let them in too deep, you had a temporary in as a permanent, you had a temporary scab employee in your life, but you mistook them for a lifer, okay? Reflect on why you put yourself in that position, why you misjudged the situation, why you misjudged the person, why you developed that much faith in somebody who didn't ultimately deserve it. Perform the austerity of having enough respect for yourself that you let people go when they want to go. If people want to be around, they can be around. People who want to go, they can go. You will still experience withdrawal. You'll still undergo the pain because your neurotransmitters got linked up with them. But you'll stop yourself from being miserable, and you'll stop yourself from the sunken cost fallacy of continuing to invest in relationships which were not going to be irreparable anyway. That's number one. Number two, if you have enough sufficient, I want to give you guys something really gritty to chew on. Number two, a more basic thing, which is in some ways more important to focus on, is if you're enough, you're going to attract people who are also of the same ilk. You never partner up with somebody who's far beneath you. It doesn't work. It's just a relationship just won't work. It just won't happen. It's like two magnets that are, different. They're not meant to attract each other. So when you wind up in a relationship with somebody, it's because that's the level you're at. So you attract people at that level. It's just what it is. And so